just those nights where you started off feeling so great and then you want to keep the party going, so you get more drugs, and then everyone else kind of goes to bed because even though they like to party, they're not obsessed by it. And then you sit up and you're just doing these lines on your own, and you can't get your head straight, but you don't want your head straight. And then the moment that you see that the coke is running low, you freak out because you're like, no, if I don't keep going, I'm going to have to think about this. I'm going to have to acknowledge what I've done and what I've set myself up for.
Welcome everybody, this is Simon Gilbo with Inspired. It's great to be back with you for another dose of just positivity, and we are bombarded with so much bad news, aren't we? There's so much depressing stuff going on in the world, and if you're new to Inspired, it's all about meeting friends of mine from different walks of life and hearing how they've journeyed through some of the sort of sucker punches that life has thrown them, and how they've overcome, and how faith has played a key role in that. And I have no doubt that you're going to be encouraged, stirred and inspired this week, because I've got a fantastic guest whose name is Lauren Windle. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you so much. What an introduction. It's I'm very pleased to be here. I'm excited.
It's great to have you. So Lauren, you're a journalist. I think you're known mostly for my context of knowing you would be for talking about overcoming addiction and cocaine addiction, alcohol addiction. Our paths crossed. I think we last saw each other at Creation Fest last summer, where you were giving a talk. I think
yes.
Before, after me, we were both talking there. And yes, listen, it's interesting, isn't it? When people say, who am I? Or when you do an intro, if you were to ask to say, who am I? What would you answer?
Oh gosh, I would. Yeah, I always feel challenged not to lead with professional things when people ask who you are, but it's kind of natural, isn't it? So I'm a writer and a public speaker, and I do some presenting, and I focus on, the very generic term faith, which is incredibly broad, but also love and dating, particularly in a church context. But my sort of first love is addiction and recovery, because I am in recovery from addiction.
Right. So let's go right back. Tell us about the context, your childhood, teenage years.
Yeah. Okay. So I was actually raised going to church. My mum is Christian, and she took me to church. I didn't love it. I didn't really get it. I found that I quite liked God and all of that stuff, but actually the church community and Christians I really struggled with. Mm-hmm. So classic thing, your parents drag you off to church, and then at around sort of 13 or so, when you're old enough to stay home on your own without supervision, they say, do you want to keep coming or not? It's your choice. And I chose not to. And I was quite a sort of anxious person when I was younger. And I think to an extent, I can still carry that over. But I was really socially anxious. Mm-hmm. And I think back then, I wouldn't have had the sort of in the early noughties, wouldn't have had the language to put to that. I think that we're a lot better at identifying those things now. But all I knew was that I'd get somewhere and I'd feel really uncomfortable, even if I was surrounded by friends. Right. And actually, I was just so desperate to be liked and be popular. And I so wanted to be like that fun person who everyone wanted to spend time with. And that effectively became my main motivation. And then it was around that time that I started drinking.
Go on, so tell us about the sort of slippery slope.
Slippery slope, the slide that I pelted myself down. Well, yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? I think lots of teenagers, and I always say like, where I grew up in London, but actually this is everywhere. It's not just in my specific area. It's really easy for young people to drink in an incredibly damaging way, because for me and my friends, it was completely normal. For somebody to throw up on a night out was just par for the course. It wasn't like, oh gosh, no. Whereas now, if you're out with your friends and one of your friends drinks to the point of vomiting, you'd be a bit concerned, like, gosh, I wonder what their day's been like, Whereas back then it was like, that's just kind of what a reasonable majority did. So it didn't feel like such a big deal. So I wasn't challenged on drinking. And I had found this solution within it that actually it's not that I felt I came across any better, probably worse, to be honest, once I'd drunk. But I just wasn't thinking about that anxiety. I was able to sort of just park it. It was still there, but it could go unacknowledged in a way that when I was sober, it couldn't. So I carried on using drinking very much as a crutch. And all the way up until like university, still drinking very heavily. But at this point, I hadn't really taken drugs. I'd smoked some weed. I'd tried a few bits and pieces, but I hadn't felt like enamored by any drug that I'd had up until that point. And it was when I actually left university. So it's quite a late stage that I decided to start experimenting because I was like 22. And I had been in this long-term relationship, and that guy left me, and I was completely broken, and it had been really codependent, and I'd modeled my whole identity on him now. So first it was, oh, just be really fun, get really drunk, and then it was in that relationship, and then I was kind of left without really knowing who I was. So I got this job again. We define ourselves by what we do for our jobs. So I thought, okay, well, I'll get this job. And I went into doing events and marketing for a group of restaurants, and hospitality is one of those industries that is, again, much like the London thing, I say like, oh, it's one of those really drinky industries, but every industry I seem to talk to people about, they're like, oh yeah, mine too. Doctors, oh yeah, estate agents. It seems like everyone is in a sort of drinking culture if they want to find it within their industry. But there was a very work hard, play hard attitude. And I just launched myself in the absence of anything more purposeful. I launched myself into it. And I was so enamored by the sort of the fun, what I thought was fun, and the bright lights and the fancy places. And very quickly things got out of hand for me. It felt very fabulous initially, going to a fancy bar or drinking a glass of champagne and stuff like that. But it really spiraled. And it was in that environment that somebody introduced me to cocaine. And that, I think, is when everything hit the fan, as it were.
Go on. So I don't want to sugarcoat this in any way because I think it's
Yeah.
really helpful to hear. I mean, superficially, it looks like a glamorous life, but it's not, is it? It's just, yes, as much detail as you feel appropriate to share. Go for it.
Do you know, it's so funny because I speak about this a lot. And obviously my friendship group are really aware of the fact that I'm in recovery and we've got certain sort of things in place in terms of alcohol and stuff. So if people come for dinner at my house, they're welcome to bring a bottle of wine for them to drink. But if there's any left in that bottle, they need to take it with them when they leave rather than leaving wine at my house. Just things like that. And everyone's really accommodating. But it struck me recently when we were having a conversation about something that actually people hear, cocaine addict, and they picture like, oh, well, that's quite fabulous, really, like a bit Lindsay Lohan, a bit, going off to the Priory, going into rehab. And I think people just think like, oh, bit naughty for a while. Like, actually, it is grim to be in an addiction. And what starts off feeling fabulous gets really dark and really lonely really quickly, to the point where you're distancing yourself from anyone who truly loves you, anyone who truly wants the best for you and is looking out for you, because they challenge you on your behavior. They can see that you're spiraling. Whereas the people who don't care, the people who are in it for the good time, they don't. So they're the ones you surround yourself with. There are a subset of seedy London nightlife that opens at 3 a.m. So the actual clubs open at 3 a.m. and then they stay open till about 10 a.m. So you're leaving in daylight, having gone in pitch black, and it's just pure drug dealers, sex workers, and just really shady characters. But they're the places where you could keep partying, where they didn't search your bag when you went in because they knew what you were probably bringing in with you. And that was it. And so many nights I'd go out with friends and then I'd just sneak away from them because they wouldn't want me to pick up drugs or anything like that. And I'd just be walking streets on my own, going into clubs and bars. I remember like being on my own at a bar and someone coming over and trying to sort of pick me up or something, and being like, not physically pick me up, I mean sort of,
Yeah, yeah.
pull. And just in case that wasn't clear. You never know. Sometimes there are Christian people I speak to who just haven't had that sort of lifestyle. So you do have to explain the terminology a bit. But I'm sure most people know what someone picking you up is. But yeah, and he was like, "Where are your friends?" And I just lied and said that, "Oh, they're in the toilet. Oh, I've lost them." And actually, that's so dangerous. Just to be like wandering around trying to convince people that you are with friends when you're not, and you just wake up and feel such shame about doing things like that. And I was so focused on drugs and alcohol that I just ended up being incredibly distant with people who had really invested in me. And when people said like, "Oh, you think what you're doing so like fun, so rock and roll, so like, crazy lifestyle, but actually like, have you ever gone at sunrise and watched that sunrise from a hill somewhere?" And I would just think like, "Oh, that's a shame. You just haven't tried the right drugs."
Yes.
Like I honestly, and the thing is, my world, it closed in around me. It became so small that all I could see as being a good and positive thing were drugs and alcohol. I didn't take pleasure from friends and family. And when I did spend time with my family who loved me and cared about me and so, really wanted to be nurturing, although definitely found me frustrating and difficult, I just felt guilty and unwelcome. I chose to feel unwelcome because I didn't feel I deserved that level of care. And that's horrible. I didn't bother to fight for sobriety or to be clean because I just assumed that everyone was base level miserable and this is the way I coped with it, and I'd have to find something else that caused pain to cope with it otherwise. It wasn't worth fighting for because I didn't know what would be on the other side. And even when I realized I was addicted, I just thought, okay, fine, this is just going to be me till I die because I'm not swapping the misery of addiction for the misery of abstinence. I'd rather do this with the drugs than without. And that's it. And I think people just don't really think it through. And I remember saying to one person who was a bit mansplainy, if we're honest, who didn't didn't really know much about addiction at all. But I said to him like, "Oh, I'm really pleased that I stopped because I think I'd be dead." And he was like, "Not dead." And I was like, "No, dead. Like, I think I would be in an institution in prison or I'd be dead. And to be honest, I'd prefer the death over living the way that I was living." Like just those nights where you started off feeling so great and then you want to keep the party going. So you get more drugs and then everyone else kind of goes to bed because even though they like to party, they're a bit more normal than you. They're not obsessed by it. And then you sit up and you're just doing these lines on your own and you can't get your head straight, but you don't want your head straight. And then the moment that you see that the Coke is running low, you freak out because you're like, "No, if I don't keep going, I'm going to have to think about this. I'm going to have to acknowledge what I've done and what I've set myself up for." And then you start doing crazy things like licking the table because there's cigarette ash on it and you think some of that might be cocaine residue, like just to get as much as you can, just to eke out the last minutes of it. And cocaine's horrific. It's like that depiction of hell. Like nothing satisfies you. Nothing will scratch that itch. You cannot talk enough. You cannot drink enough. You cannot smoke enough. You cannot do enough cocaine. And you just feel empty and you keep plugging and plugging away at it. And that's it. That was what drug taking was for me. And that's not like a year down the line. That was probably within 3 weeks.
Wow.
It was, but I just wanted it. I wanted something. I wanted the distraction. So yeah, I mean, other than that's obviously all very miserable. But I mean, on top of that, I wasn't washing properly. I didn't wash my clothes. I developed a facial twitch, which I actually had done a neuroscience degree. So I understood parts of what I was doing quite well, but knowing better doesn't mean that you do better. I now have a master's in addiction since getting sober. And I know that the physical consequences I was having weren't, well, I was having nosebleeds and I now have cavernous nostrils. And that is definitely a result of cocaine. But in terms of the other symptoms, numbness in my fingers and toes, floaters in front of my eyes, all of that was because of my drinking, and cocaine facilitated my drinking and allowed me to drink more. So that's why I had all of those sort of horrific things. And all of this was just so I could be popular, so I wouldn't feel anxious that people didn't like me. And then I'm sitting there with like my face twitching after 2 glasses of wine. It's like sobriety gave me everything drugs and alcohol promised, but I just didn't see that at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it really was that bad. And what's scary, I think, about drugs and alcohol, right, is it is like Russian roulette. If alcohol was discovered now, it'd be a class A drug. There's no two ways about it. But because it's so ingrained in our societies, because it's so built into our culture and our practices, there's no way it would ever be outlawed. I mean, and prohibition doesn't work. If the war on drugs doesn't work. Just telling people just say no and abstinence, it doesn't work. So I'm not saying that these things should be banned, but what's scary is that virtually everyone in the UK, assuming you're not Muslim or from some sort of denominations of Christianity that discourage drinking full stop, pretty much everyone's going to try alcohol. And then a decent proportion, particularly of younger people, are going to try an illicit drug, right? You really don't know until you've done it if you're going to be one of the people who gets hooked. And it's about 10% when it comes to alcohol, about 10% when it comes to cocaine as well, of people who try it, who it becomes a problem. And actually, that is 10% effectively of the population, because 10% of almost everyone is 10%, and it's so much more prolific than we care to acknowledge. And people just don't know what it looks like, particularly around alcohol addiction. But, that's the thing. By the time you realize how important it is to make the right choice when it comes to drugs and alcohol, often, by then your ability to do so in your own will is gone and you're trapped.
So are you holding down a job? You managed to keep the show on the road through this?
I did have a job during this time in restaurants, and I wasn't fired. I think I was probably close to it a couple of times, but actually it was just built into the lifestyle, and it was some of the more senior people in that company who introduced me to drugs in the first place. Right. So, I don't think anyone wants that HR discussion if they had fired me.
You talk about, not washing anymore. So obviously being to smell. I mean, is there like a moment where it's like, okay, this has gone too far?
Someone at work did tell me that every day he saw me, I looked more and more like a crackhead. I do remember that really clearly, and thinking like, oh, that's not ideal. I should sort myself out a bit. There were times when I would look after myself, and times where I'd just douse myself in deodorant and stuff like that, and times where I'd go into the bathroom and set an alarm for 3 minutes later and just sleep on the cold tile floor for 3 minutes and then get up and sit at my desk again. It was all really quite miserable.
So go on then. What was the turning point ultimately?
Yeah, I think everyone has a couple, well, ideally just the one rock bottom. I definitely had a few moments where I was like, I am ruining my life. I remember the first time I told someone I was an addict, I screamed at a boyfriend during a argument, and it was partly just to sort of like get his attention, but also because I think it was a bit of a relief to say what I was afraid of out loud. And his response was, if you're addicted to cocaine, just stop taking it, which makes all the sense in the world, but none of the sense in the world at the same time, like if I could, I would, Yeah. Then I remember going out for dinner with some friends, and they didn't take drugs, but I went and picked up 2 grams of cocaine, which is a decent amount. And I don't really like talking about amounts because everyone has a different threshold. It's like saying like, oh, I drink 3 glasses of wine. And that's fine. But actually for some people that really wouldn't be fine. And for others, they have a higher body mass and things like that. So it does make a difference. But so I picked up what was, for me at least, a decent amount to take, particularly in one night. In fact, no, that's a pretty hefty amount to take in one night for one smallish woman. Went back to the restaurant, and they had decided, it's about 10 o'clock on a Thursday, that they were cool just to go home. And I was gutted because I thought, oh my gosh, no, I've just picked up 2 grams of Coke. I want to go out. I want to keep the party going. And then I just went home and I just took it, just sat up. And I remember my alarm going off to tell me to go into work at 7:30, and I'd just done my last line of Coke. And I called my boss and I said, I'm not coming in. And I think that she could tell that I was in a place where I was unwell, rather than just being, the worst employee in the world. And she said, okay, I'm going to, I'll record that you've been unwell today, and I will call you sort of 6 o'clock at the end of the working day, and we'll chat about it. And I just called my sister and said, can you come round after work? And she came, and she was the prodigal. Well, I was the prodigal. She was the one who stayed and didn't get any credit for it. Right. So she was just like, I just said, I'm taking cocaine and I don't know how to stop, and I don't know what to do about it. And she moved me in with her, and she took me to church, and she made me quit my job. She typed out the resignation letter and all of that kind of stuff. And she was incredibly encouraging. But even that, and I moved away from London for a bit just to get some space. Even that was productive. It was a brick or several bricks in the wall that became my recovery. But even that dramatic change didn't stop me. It was later down the line when so maybe about 9 months or a year after that, I was living with a friend, and who again didn't take drugs and was trying to really make a difference. And we went out for one drink, and I had really, and this was my classic, like really had to bend her arm to come out for one drink. She's really not a big drinker. She had like a half of cider or something, and I had a glass of wine. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to stay out. And she was like, I knew you were going to do this. You always say one drink, and it's never one drink. She was like, well, I'm not staying out. And she marched home, and I stayed out until 7 a.m. And she was furious with me when I got home, because obviously I woke her up sort of crashing around, being very drunk. And when I woke up the next late morning, she came crashing into the room, told me what an idiot I was, and I had a black eye and I didn't know where it had come from. And she was just furious. So between her and another friend, they gave me the details of a recovery group that they wanted me to go to. And I said I'd go because I thought it would be quite funny and quite sort of like good people watching, and not funny, like let's laugh at these people, but I'd seen the sort of anonymous meetings and things on like TV, and I thought that would be, I thought it would be really interesting to see what those were about, and always had a bit of an interest in psychology and things like that. So I went, but actually what I found wasn't like an opportunity for voyeurism. I felt so in the right place. And there was a group of women sitting around the table, and often those meetings, particularly when they're drug focused, are men sort of in their 50s. So I really feel like God put those women in that room to show me, you can be in your 20s and you can do this, and actually it's not any less of a life. But I wasn't praying to God. I didn't know or particularly care about God at that time, despite my sister's efforts to reintroduce me. So yeah, and I just cried for that whole meeting as they shared about their journeys and their lives, and the things that had hurt them. And there's a real magic to hearing someone share about something you've experienced. And I genuinely thought no one else had felt how I'd felt. And it felt like they were pulling thoughts out of my head. And I just had no idea that there were so many people out there who felt the same kind of agony that I had. So that was a real turning point for me.
And still no God in the picture. When did he show up?
Yeah, God, yeah, he's got such a good way of wangling in, hasn't he? He just pops up when you need him. No, so in these groups, they aren't religious in that they don't subscribe to any particular religion, but they do really, really encourage you to submit to a higher power, and they don't dictate what that higher power is. So they'll use terms like God as you understand him, or just higher power, or something like that. And it was the third meeting that I'd ever been to, and I had committed to doing 90 meetings in 90 days because the sort of mentality is if you can invest that much time in your drinking and using, then you can invest that much time in your well-being and your recovery. So I went off and started doing that, and it was the third meeting, and this guy was talking about his higher power, and I don't know what his higher power was. I think it was like nature or the trees or something. He didn't like it became apparent to me that he wasn't talking about like a sort of Christian or like he wasn't Jewish or Muslim or anything like that. He was just sort of floaty spiritual. But he did say really clearly to me, you need to work out what your high power is. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, the last time I had any connection with a higher power was in church. So I just Googled, church, and the first one that came up is the one that I went to.
Wow.
So investing in your search engine optimization for a church is an excellent idea.
Go on, which one was it?
It was in Paris, because I had left London. So it was called Trinity International in Paris. And they weren't by any means the biggest English speaking church in Paris, but they did have the best SEO. So that's it. So that's where I went. And I went up and asked for prayer at the end, because they said like, oh, if you want prayer, come and speak to me. The vicar did. And I went over and asked, and he was like, yeah, what can I pray for you for? And I said, oh, I'm 5 days clean and sober from a drug and alcohol addiction. And it was sort of like, you could see the panic fill his eyes. And he was like, okay, this is not a drill, like sit down. And he brought over an amazing couple who prayed for me. And the woman really took me under her wing and invited me to a women's Bible study. And they were very gentle with me. I had given up drugs and alcohol, but I still smoked, and I still smoked for a good year and a half. I was, when I was baptized, I was still smoking. And there's lots of people who'd be like, oh, but you're Christian, you can't smoke. Well, but actually God meets you where you are, and he knows what you're working on first and what's most valuable in terms of your relationship with him and your progression and your character development. And God didn't challenge me on smoking for a full year and a half because I there was so many bigger fish to fry, at that time. So maybe I did smell of cigarettes, and maybe people did think that wasn't very Christian, but there were loads of things that weren't very Christian. And it just took me time they prioritized introducing me to the love of Jesus above correcting my behavior. And if they'd gone the other way, I don't think I'd be a Christian now.
Yeah. Hi folks, this podcast comes out under the auspices of Great Lakes Outreach, and over the next few weeks, over the Easter season, we're doing an appeal for a fantastic project. We are building a pastor's retirement village in Karuzi in Burundi. Basically, they are often these pastors left on the scrap heap of life, having given their everything for decades. There's no social security, there's no pension system in Burundi. And unless their family take care of them, they can end up absolutely destitute, hungry, and even regretting that they gave their life to ministry. That is so wrong. And so we're looking at buying 17.5 hectares of land, which means that the whole project will be self-sustaining. For £25 or $30, you could buy 100 square meters. And that is a gift that will keep on giving for decades to come, as every harvest season, fresh crops will be grown and provide for these precious people that gave their whole lives to ministry. It's a brilliant project. I'd love you to be a part of it. Just £25 for or $30 for 100 square meters or more. Go to greatlakesoutreach.org/pastors. That's greatlakesoutreach.org/pastors, so that we can honor those who honored him. I was young and now I'm old, yet I've never seen the righteous forsaken nor their children begging bread. That's what we want to be contributing to. Great idea, brilliant vision. It's going to happen. Do you want to be a part of it? Please do. All right, let's get back to the podcast. So, and do you feel like it was just a gradual falling in love with Jesus, or did he sort of smack you in the face?
It was gradual. Like they talked to me at that prayer, they talked me through the sort of classic, give my life to you. I've sinned. I repent. I give my life to you, Jesus thing. And I had to repeat back. And I wasn't like, as far as I was concerned, it didn't change anything. I left the place feeling the same, but it did, and that maybe was a tangible line in the sand for where I started on that journey. It wasn't like a lightning bolt moment, but God was really good at speaking to me when I hadn't quite worked out how to hear from him. Mm-hmm. Like I remember that first day, when I went to church, they invited me for coffee, but I had a recovery meeting. Obviously, I was doing one meeting a day for 90 days. So I had a recovery meeting at 6 p.m. that day that I had to get to. And I knew it was somewhere in Paris, but I didn't know where it was. So I turned down the coffee. Everything takes 45 minutes to get to in Paris. That's the rule, right? So I left the church where it was and turned down the coffee and didn't spend time sort of socializing with them because I wanted to get off to this meeting. And then I Googled the address of the meeting, and the Google Maps like pin just went like whoom and zoomed in on my location. I was like, oh, it's broken. Like, oh, it's telling me where I am now. So I did it again. Mm-hmm. And the meeting I needed was in 45 minutes in the church building of that church. So, and to me, like, I didn't know how to talk to God. I didn't know how to talk to Jesus. I certainly didn't know how to talk to the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. So, but to me, that was just like, turn around, go upstairs, accept the cup of tea, have a few biscuits and just chat to a few people, and I did. And I just remember thinking like, oh my gosh, maybe this is real. And it was slow. It was great. I think it always had to be for me. I don't think I would have accepted it. I would have associated God with something bad if my relationship with him had involved high highs and low lows. But because it was just a case of I kept showing up and he kept showing up, it was the consistency that made all the difference for me. And that is, I think, what I needed. Whereas I think there are other people who need the lightning bolt, who need the complete, filled with the Spirit, rolling around laughing the moment it all happens. But God, that's what's so amazing. It's not a cookie cutter. It's like God really knows us. And that's what I needed.
And might be too obvious question, but how has he changed you? What has Jesus done in you?
Oh my gosh. So much that it's like hard to even know where to start. I do not care what other people think of me anymore. And I think that's really important when
That's a beautiful gift.
Do you know, it really is. Like, obviously I care if I've upset someone, but in terms of like, I don't think I'd be able to share this story if I cared what people thought of me, because there are people who are like, who say some really horrible things. We're in a world where people have the internet and use it liberally. But actually, like, I feel like at some point, God just completely numbed me. Like I can read something that someone said about the fact that I'm a drug addict in recovery or whatever and just not care, and that is so polar opposite to that 13-year-old who would do anything just to be liked or to be popular, and that is incredibly freeing. And I love that I have seen myself grow in wisdom, in empathy, in patience, in gratitude over these years. And again, like, this is all so gradual. And I think that people think that you come to faith and then you just like are this sort of whole package. I only started liking myself, I think maybe when I was 4 years sober. So I'd been Christian for 4 years. It took me such a long time to unpick those lies of the enemy and to really believe that I was worthy of love and God's love. And I think that that's an ongoing thing for me and for a lot of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even like, I wasn't safe to be around kids. I can remember really clearly it being like 8 a.m. No, earlier, 6:30 a.m. And I'd been at a house party where some people had children and they'd put their children to bed at like whatever normal time you put kids to bed. And I was still up with one other person taking coke in the living room. And then obviously the kids woke up at like 6:30 ready to watch cartoons and stuff like that. And I remember the face on the mum who had gone to bed shortly after her kids, not at a crazy time, and saw that I was still sitting there wired, like having just sort of shuffled away some cocaine because the children were awake. And I saw her, like, just with a slightly heightened sort of tone in her voice, call her kids to come away and watch TV in the bedroom instead. And I remember thinking, like, I'm not safe to be around kids. And that was really hard. Whereas now I'm the godparent to four gorgeous little
Lovely.
boys. Yeah. And like people actually want me to speak into their children's lives and want me to spend time with their kids. And that's like, that just makes me feel so much more full, so much more wholesome, so much more alive than anything before, like I just think that's such an incredible gift.
Yeah, yeah. I love it that you are willing to. It's cliche, isn't it? Your mess has become your message, and you're willing to share it. And I came back from preaching in Manchester last night, and I had a couple of people, three different people come and say, I heard you 12, 14, one 18 years ago, and
Wow.
what you said changed my life. And it's like, it's so encouraging, isn't it?
Oh,
Now, what
yeah.
you've shared a lot. You're on the road, you're speaking at loads of conferences, and you're a writer, you're doing all sorts. So
Yeah.
give us some of those stories of where your mess that became your message has changed people's lives.
Oh my gosh, I have had some just incredible messages from people, and I got a message on in September. They said 1 year ago today, or 1 year ago, like 1 year ago yesterday, you spoke at this event. And I haven't drunk since, and you've changed, and you've completely changed my life. And thank you.
Beautiful.
And you're just and I just, it almost feels too good, to be able to have even a window into those moments. And like, and I love it when people say that I've encouraged them in their faith and stuff like that, but on the whole I don't do like straight down the line evangelism. I'm not like J John. I'll just talk about God, and you can and take or leave the God stuff, but like, here's what it's done in my life. But people when they come and tell me that they're no longer drinking, or they're no longer taking drugs, or they're this, or when I get a photo of someone's chip that they've been given in a meeting to celebrate a sobriety milestone, I honestly feel like I could just burst.
Yeah.
Like, and it was the generosity of people around me sharing their stories that got me through my initial years and continued to help me maintain my sobriety now. So to be able to be a part of that and feedback, I don't think anyone will ever, I don't think I'll ever be able to give out as much as I've been given. I'll try, but like what I have been given, there's no cost, there's no amount of money you could pay, there's no amount of time that could buy that for someone. Like I have truly been given a life beyond my wildest dreams through
Wonderful.
Christ with sobriety. And if I can help people just, put one brick in the wall of theirs, just like my sister did and other people speaking into my life, then that's just what I want to do.
And you've been sober, is it 8 years now, 9 years?
It's 8, but I will be 9 on the 22nd of April. So we're getting there.
Brilliant.
Do you know what? I celebrate it bigger than I celebrate my birthday.
Wonderful.
Like that's the big one on my calendar.
Yeah, that's so good. Hey, listen, another thing you talk a lot on, and it's funny because when we saw each other at Creation Fest, you gave me your book, and I said, well, I suppose I could have received it, but it's on singleness, and I just thought, maybe someone else would be better for. But but that is something that I think is worth talking about because obviously there's a lot of people in the church that feel marginalised and not valued, and the church isn't necessarily very good at it. What's your approach? We had Miriam Swaffield on a few months ago. She is now married. She's a very high-profile speaker. She's a brilliant lady, a very good mate, and she had some great thoughts to share. But I love it that you'll come at it a slightly different angle. So what would you want to say on that?
Yeah, I think so. It's funny for me. Obviously, I did dating, and my dating life when I wasn't Christian was very messy because I was also obviously in addiction. But I had dated for, 10 years from 15 to 25 outside of the church. And then I came into the church and I was like really surprised by what the dating culture looked like. And it took me a long time to date within church because it all just felt very unclear and a bit
Hmm.
messy. And, do you want to date someone in your church? How do you do that well? But all of that time where I wasn't really dating in the church or actually dating at all, I felt this real pressure that you don't get to the upper echelons of church life and society without a husband or a wife, obviously, if you're a man. And actually, like, I think, and particularly for women, I think that there can be this unspoken thing, and it's not said, and no one would say it because it's not right, but it's just sort of felt that if you're a Christian woman sort of past a certain age, and there are 24-year-olds who feel that they're at that age, and then
Yeah.
there are 64-year-olds who feel that they're at that age. So it's almost just sort of your perspective. But that you've just been left behind, that you've been left on the shelf. Whereas a man is sort of like, oh, they just haven't picked yet, oh, they just need to stop being Peter Pan and a lost boy and just pick a wife.
Yeah.
Whereas women, like, they feel that their value is undermined by the fact that they're single in church. And I think that that is so wrong. And I mean, it's
Mm.
not biblical. Paul talks about, the value of being single, and Jesus who lived like a full life and is the model for living, did not get married. So if we needed to, in order to sort of experience life in its fullest, then he would have,
Mm.
so, but it's kind of been lost in translation somewhere. And even though no one's actually saying marriage is better, they're not saying it. And I think that we need to acknowledge that there are perks and challenges to being single, and there are perks and challenges to being married, but one is not an upgrade on the other.
Yeah. So you've written a book, Notes on Love. Give us a bit more of your sort of the cream of that book, the best tips or whatever.
Gosh, yeah, notes on love. Okay, so it's divided into 3 sections, and I'll give you one tip from each section. So the first section is being single, and I've, in quite a serious way, run through why I think that needs more volume. And I do talk about that quite a lot, and elaborate on that within the book. But I think that the takeaway, and this is for you because you're married, right?
Hmm.
Is more some of the stuff that people say to single people in the church,
Mm.
like the sort of sidling up to people. And it's someone often who like is an older member of the church who you just don't necessarily know that well, haven't really invited into accountability in your life. And they're like, oh, well, when's your turn? Oh, are you really getting yourself out there? Have you tried those apps? Are you maybe
Mm.
being a bit too picky? Oh, I'm so surprised you're single. You're just amazing. And you're like,
Mm.
okay, none of this is helpful, Doris.
Yeah.
I know that you're coming from a really like really loving place, but actually, that can feel very challenging to someone who's single. Particularly, there are people within the church for whom the fact that they're single is like the greatest disappointment of their life.
Mm.
So I think we need to wait to be invited and to have
Mm.
some real proximity to someone before we ask those kind of questions.
Hmm.
And then on the dating section, which is the middle section, so for people who have decided that dating is for them, that they don't feel sort of called to singleness and they want to get out there and enjoy that time, I would say my top tips are to, right, on a dating app, rather than just treating it like it's a computer game to be completed, like swiping left, swiping right, all of that kind of stuff. Like, actually pick up your phone. And I spoke to a dating sort of psychologist about this. Pick up your phone, look at the first profile, think about it, even pray about it for a minute or two, really read it, read what they're trying to communicate to you, look at the pictures, see what they say about their faith, all of that kind of stuff, and then decide if you want to match with that person. And if you don't or do, then, react accordingly, but then put your phone down and that's it. and then maybe an hour later do that again, because that's how you honor each person that you see. Whereas most people spend half a second looking at the top picture before they make a decision as to whether they want to connect more, and you get into a rejection mindset when really actually there's a person who has got stories and character and passions behind that profile. So just give it a little bit of space to see whether there would be something deeper there. And then the final bit, right, is real love. And obviously, I believe that you experience real love and the fullness of real love outside of romantic relationships. And it's amazing if romantic relationships can mirror that, but that is God's love. And I think that we can show that to other people by getting the balance between hospitality and entertainment right. And if we get this right, then actually single people in our churches can be single but not lonely. Yeah. And that's like, if you've got a house, you've got a, and you're not in a shared house, maybe you with your children or something like that. We think that hospitality is like cleaning up before people come and taking their coats and, we put some music on during dinner and, we've made a apple pie as well, and there's 2 courses. Actually, that's entertainment, and that's lovely, and entertaining's really fun, and it's incredible to show people that. But actually hospitality is going, just let yourself in, there's a pasta bake in the fridge that you can pop in the microwave, we're all going to watch this film later, and then make it, and then letting them put their own dish in the dishwasher. People need that welcome, that open, and not to feel like a guest, but to feel like family. And I think that we can all do that better as a church.
Brilliant. Well, listen, I'll plug that for you. That's Notes on Love, being single and dating in a marriage-obsessed church. Listen, time's pretty much run out. I don't want us to miss out on any Lauren Windle gems or pearls. You got anything else you want to share?
I guess the only other thing that I would say is if you've listened to my story and there are elements of it that you relate to, and obviously everyone's got their own journey and their own story, then I know hundreds of people who are in recovery, but I don't know anyone who did that on their own. And it is the most powerful thing you can do, is to ask for help. And I would so encourage you to do that, because your life is so precious. It is worth reclaiming your freedom and reclaiming the fullness of life that Jesus died to give you. And you can reach out to charities or your doctor or your church or, your church leaders or someone who you trust within the congregation, or these anonymous fellowships which run everywhere around the country. And even actually there's church recovery groups as well, like Celebrate Recovery or Steps or the Recovery Course, which I'm involved with as well. So there's loads of opportunities. But actually you're too valuable to allow this one thing to take over everything else.
Lauren Windle, you are such a beautiful trophy of grace. How can people be in touch with you or get more on you?
Yeah, I'm on all of the social media platforms and stuff like that, but I've got a website which is laurenwindle.com, and there's links to all sorts of bits and pieces on there, all my socials and talk I've done and podcasts and things.
Great. Well, keep up the fantastic work. 9 years sober. Long may that continue by God's grace. And I know that you're impacting thousands of lives through your story. So that's beautiful. Listen, folks, if you've been inspired, if you've been encouraged, I'd love you to give us a great review on Spotify, iTunes. You can be in touch with Lauren. We'll put that in the blurb. With me, simongilbert.com. I want to thank Adam Thomas Steer for the editing and Mike Sandman for the mixing. I want to thank you, Lauren. Bless you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you, mate. All right, everybody, we'll see you next time with another fantastic guest. In the meantime, have a good week and toodaloo.